Often when people think of emotion, they think of dramatic displays of negative feelings, like a maiden weeping, or a hot-headed thug lashing out in anger. But emotion can also be positive. So today I want to talk about a novel that does both. It Happened One Doomsday by Laurence MacNaughton, How to Read Like a Writer. This novel is funny and a bit romantic, as well as being thrilling, terrifying, and filled with suspense. MacNaughton accomplishes this by building a magic system with constraints, having a flawed main character, and using tone and mood. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's start with the arrival of the Four Horsemen, terrifying and fun. One of my favorite parts of It Happened One Doomsday is the fun, humorous tone that contrasts with the dark subject matter of the beginning of the apocalypse. MacNaughton manages to create this tone by making sure his characters approach their situations with humor, with a good attitude, and a light tone. Here's an example of his main character, Drew, calling for help when she's confronted with a demon. "Drew, I need your help." "Demon ass kicking? Count me in," Rain said. "You're like 10 minutes from me. I'll be there in 5. "Okay, hurry." Drew could hear Rain breathing even harder. "In the meantime, stall him, but don't get yourself, killed." "How am I supposed to stall him?" Drew said. "Cowgirl up." "Right." Drew shook her head. "Wait, what does that even mean?" But Rain had already hung up. Here, Rain doesn't just agree to help Drew, she's enthusiastic about it. She wants to do this demon ass kicking. That's part of where the humorous and light tone comes from. The other humorous and lighter part is when Drew is trying to figure out what Rain means by cowgirl up. That's a funny response in a dark situation. If you want to lighten the mood of something like being attacked by a demon, think of your character's reactions. Yes, it's often funny when you have one character who's over the top terrified, and they do something unexpected or cause a chain of events like knocking over display cases. But it's also funny and more empowering when your characters react to a dark, dangerous situation with a good attitude and the belief that they can succeed. Sometimes that can create an even lighter and more humorous tone than the bumbling, terrified character. Also, if you want to add a lighter tone, think of how humor can often be a defense mechanism. We see this a lot in law enforcement and other first responders. They're faced with gruesome real-life events all the time. One way of coping with this is through humor. They make each other laugh. They tell jokes about things other people in society might find inappropriate. But laughter is a great way to lighten the mood, to lighten the tone. If you have a character in a profession like that, think about how they might use humor to get through their daily lives without descending into despair. So, why might your character approach a dark situation with a lighter tone? Even though the overall emotion of It Happened One Doomsday is light and funny, this is still a serious story. The monsters the characters are faced with are truly terrifying. These demons are smart, they're fast, they heal quickly, and they all have a surprise up their sleeve. That's terrifying. These are formidable foes. So just because your story is light does not mean you get to skimp on tension-building elements of a good story. The stakes of It Happened One Doomsday are death. Literal, physical death. If you are trying to craft a tension-packed but lighter story, think about your stakes. When you raise the stakes, you automatically raise the tension and suspense. Your stakes don't have to be physical death. It could be the death of a career, a relationship, a spiritual death, but something as serious as that is what you need to really ramp up that tension. This is why It Happened One Doomsday is so successful with its light tone and dark subject matter. Next, I want to share how competent and bright beats all-powerful. One way to control the tone and make sure your characters interact with your environment is to avoid creating a Mary Sue. A Mary Sue is a character like Captain Marvel who is all-powerful. Once you realize the extent of their abilities, you never really believe they're going to lose. Because how could they? They can squash any opponent. That's not as interesting to read. And it means that those characters are going to be a bit more two-dimensional, because they can always fall back on that ability. Characters who are not all-powerful, who are flawed and forced to use other ways of dealing with their problems, are more interesting. This is where the main character of It Happened One Doomsday comes in. Drew is a barely competent crystal sorceress. She has a tiny bit of magical ability, just enough to allow her to find a place in the magical community as a shopkeeper, someone who sells magical artifacts and things needed in spells and things like that. But she's not the type of person you would turn to when you're going into a magical battle. She's not powerful enough to battle monsters. So when she finds herself face to face with a demon, she has to rely on her wits and the environment around her, as well as her magical ability, to survive the encounter. Here's an example of how she thinks outside the box to get out of this difficult situation. On the underside of the hood glowed a pair of stylized scales, just like the symbols on the demon's hands. This was the connection, she realized with a surge of terrified triumph. This was the mark of evil, as rough as it was. It looked like someone had spray painted it right onto the metal. If only she could find a way to break it. Spray paint. The thought hit her with a jolt of adrenaline. After this, Drew uses a can of spray paint to disrupt the magical symbol. What's important here is MacNaughton mentioned the spray paint earlier when they first arrived in this garage. So Drew's not just magically conjuring spray paint, she's pulling from her environment to help her get out of this situation. This is a more interesting scene than if Drew had been all-powerful and all she had to do was snap her fingers and the demon car was defeated. Another important thing about this scene is it could not have taken place anywhere else. At this point in the novel, MacNaughton needed spray paint, an indoor space that was big enough to house a car, and somewhere someone who's turning into a demon would likely go to hide and to seek comfort. That could only be that demon human's home garage. When you are picking the setting for your scenes, think of the elements you need for your story to be successful. Where would your characters really go? What do you need present in the scene to make your major plot points work? That is where you should set your scenes. Don't just pick some random place. Why an editor recommends It Happened One Doomsday. In previous videos, I talked about tone and mood. The overall humorous emotion of It Happened One Doomsday is the tone. That is a consistent feeling you get throughout the book. But, like I mentioned earlier, this is a dark subject matter story. It has high stakes. So not every scene is happy-go-lucky. The individual scenes and moments have their own emotion, and that's where the mood of the story comes in. Some scenes are pure joy and fun, like the tone would suggest. But other scenes are filled with anxiety, tension, terror, anger. Some of those darker emotions I mentioned in the beginning. It Happened One Doomsday truly uses a full range of emotion to make its story thrilling and a page-turner. If you're wondering how you can take a lighter overall tone and still craft a tension-packed story, pay attention to the mood, the emotion of each of MacNaughton's scenes. This changes, and the mood of the individual scene is what creates that tension, whereas the overall emotion, the tone, is what keeps it lighthearted. You can have both. What other writing techniques did you notice in It Happened One Doomsday by Laurence MacNaughton? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more videos on how to read like a writer, mood, tone, and character development, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a guide to building strong settings. And now it's your turn to find the humor in a dark situation, to make sure your characters are flawed and not all powerful, and to utilize mood and tone to ignite your ink.